Psalm 67. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine on us, so that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. The land yields its harvest. God, our God, blesses us. May God bless us still, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him.
Okay, good morning. Again, it's really nice to be with you. Nice to see you all here. Go to a different part of the country where I've not been so much before. Are we in the Lake District here? Nearly, sort of. Cumbria, there we go. Thank you. It's really good to be with you and good to share in God's word with you together. If you've got Psalm 67 in front of you, although I'm going to have it up on the screen actually as we go as well, so that I can show you a couple of bits that I want to highlight as we go through it. This psalm is a wonderful coming together of the theme of global mission and something of an explanation of how God's church has a place in that amazing work of his eternal kingdom. And so as we look at it, we're looking at this 3,000-year-old songbook. I don't know if you kind of think of the Psalms that way ever. It's, you know, if somebody dug it up today, they'd think, what an amazing discovery, wouldn't they? A 3,000-year-old songbook of poems, prayers, songs, the work of artists as they sought to follow Yahweh. And so as we look at it together and see what this songwriter has written about, we're seeing that he writes about the things that really motivate him, the things that he feels strongly about, and he crafts his words really skillfully, as we'll see, to try and make his point. If you forgive me, it'll sound slightly geeky to talk about this for a minute, but we need to just look at the structure of it, okay? I'm not really into analysing poetry in a literary way, but this will help us because it kind of is part of the message. So you've got the psalm here, but it comes into three sections. You've got three sections, which are verses 1 and 2, and then verses 3 to 5, and then verses 6 to 7, and you've got those three parts to it. And the thing about the way this psalm is written is that it seems to be carefully crafted in such a way that it kind of like radiates out from the middle, okay? So it's a little bit different to how we might often think about writing things. It starts in the middle, so the center section is the main bit, and then it radiates out a bit like, if you throw a rock into water, I don't know when you're on holiday or something like that, if you buy a lake and you throw it into a still bit of water, and then it just radiates out and out and out and out, doesn't it? This kind of seems to work that way. And so because of that, I'm going to start from the middle, which is a little bit unusual, but that's what we're going to do. So in the middle section, you can see that part, verses 3 to 5. And then even the middle part of the middle part, verse 4, is where I think it all begins. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth. Okay? That's his vision. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth. So this poet, this writer, is thinking about and longing for the time when all the peoples of the world are going to be glad and happy and satisfied and enjoying God, and they're enjoying all the freedom that brings. It's effectively the world that we all long for, whether we realize it or not, isn't it? A world that sees God as the one who rules with equity. He's a just, loving ruler, so we're living freely and without fear. He guides us, he leads us. We're living life in step with him, in sync with his ways, and we're enjoying justice and peace and calm and wholeness. And of course, we live something of that out as God's people in his kingdom even now, but in ultimate terms, we see it fulfilled one day in the new creation. And verse 4 has that fulfillment in view, this vision of a perfect, wonderful time that will come. But then in verse 3 and 5, either side of it, you see, if you radiate out a bit from the center, verse 3 and 5 are exactly the same. So verse 3 and 5, you get this refrain. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. Again, may the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. And he's picturing in his mind, maybe let your mind go there as well, that just every kind of person, from every ethnic group, every nation, a massive throng of people gathered together, united in their difference, praising this wonderful God, united in praise. Because, to think in those kind of terms, you could describe what we have now in our world as a discordant, broken, confused sound, couldn't you? As a contrast. There's so many different outlooks, different worldviews, different philosophies that clash, contradictory ways of thinking. You only need to spend 5 minutes on Twitter to see that, don't you? It's kind of almost painful. Social media almost kind of amplifies it, doesn't it, like a megaphone. It seems intensified in our day, doesn't it, where public discourse can be so harsh, discordant noise, and it's more than just noise, isn't it, because it has a real effect on actual lives. There's so much division and strife and pain as a result. And some of the friends and people that we partner with in Radstock experience it and live it in quite tangible ways. I mentioned just before about friends in Myanmar, where I've been in touch with them even just this week, where they're still displaced in villages trying to get away from the places where the fighting is at its worst and moving around according to where it seems to be flaring up, struggling to get basic supplies of food and soap and salt, because still living in a kind of basic sort of setup where that's a preservative. There's a real need. Other friends in Belarus, with all the political pressure and arrests that go on, in Pakistan, where there's frequent threats to brothers and sisters there. These places, they kind of pop up on our news, don't they, sometimes for a little while, briefly, and then sort of disappear again. But the struggles go on. We hear stories from within the network, and heard some recently even of people who are falsely accused of stealing money or doing other things and treated as second or third or fourth class citizens, often just because they're Christians. Or just the locations that they're in mean that gunfire and bombs and oppression and poverty are just normal. It's a broken world, isn't it? I'm in contact with a guy at the moment in one of possibly the toughest countries in the world at this time, who's presently hiding in a basement, whose life is almost unbearable as he's in fear for his life. The world is broken and discordant, and even in parts of the world that are apparently peaceful and affluent, brokenness still finds its way to the surface, doesn't it? Because it's in our hearts. It kind of finds its ways out. It bubbles to the surface, whether it's in crime rates or domestic issues, fights, arguments, just tensions amongst colleagues and family members and friends. And sometimes we contribute to it, if we're honest. Which is why, if you kind of have that as a bit of a backdrop, the alternative vision here is so compelling. Because instead of this discordant, harsh, kind of broken sound, you've got a vision of harmony, harmonious sound of united praise, praising God, all the peoples, as we said before. Let your mind run with that. Some of the places just that I've even mentioned. Imagine that just Albanians and people from Myanmar, Pakistan, Cambodians, Mongolians, Belarusians, Brits, Irish. We might even let the Americans in. All kinds of people from every nation are part of this wonderful, wonderful place. And beyond, even the places where at the moment there are no churches. The unreached peoples of the world. According to the Joshua Project, they calculate that there's more than 7,000 people groups that are effectively unreached still. But this vision is of everybody, including them, gathered together, praising God in harmony and wholeness and joy, living under his reign. As the New Testament has it in Revelation 7, people of every nation, tribe, people and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, they cry in a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And that's what we're seeing here, really. Psalm 67, same idea. An amazing vision, a true utopia. A true utopia. So I guess one of the things, in terms of that being his big passion as he writes this song, one of the things to ask is, do you feel something of this? Does your heart long for this? Does your spirit in any sense kind of groan for this? Because, and maybe you're not even actually a Christian yet. Maybe you're not part of this. But you've got to admit, haven't you, as you look at it, it's a compelling vision. Even if it might seem a bit strange, this is a compelling thing, isn't it? And we're invited into it. Consider yourself invited as you read this. The God of the universe invites us, wherever we're from, whoever we are, to join in with this kingdom, to be part of this gathering from around the world, around the throne, around the Lord, around the Lamb, and be part of it. But how is this coming about? How is God bringing this about? Well, that's where we then radiate out a bit further, again, to the outer sections of the psalm. Because as we go out further from the center, there's something that we need to comprehend from the first and last bits, and that is this. That there is a connection between the community, the life of the community of God's people, and the nations of the world finding out about him and knowing him and enjoying him. Okay? There's a connection between the life of the community, of a group of God's people, and the nations of the world coming to know him. If you look at verse 1 and 2 first at the beginning there, you can see it says, "May God be gracious to us and bless us, make his face shine on us, so that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations." As poets and songwriters sometimes do, he's kind of using words to echo to other words, point your mind towards other words. And as he writes that, he's echoing something of the priestly blessing from Numbers 6, which, as I read it to you, you'll probably be familiar with it, you'll recognize it, where it says, "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you his peace." It's a prayer from the early days, a prayer from the days when the nation of Israel had first left Egypt. They were just becoming established as a nation. It's a blessing from the foundational documents of the nation of Israel, from their national heritage, if you like. So it was a really affirming thing, a really precious thing that communicated something powerful to them, because it said, you are God's people. And this psalm then echoes that same idea, doesn't it? And says, may God be gracious to us. May he bless us. May he act positively towards us and for our flourishing. And make his face shine on us. That is a great image, isn't it? May his face shine. It's a kind of, the warmth of the shine of God's face. It's a lovely image when somebody looks at you. You're known. When somebody looks at you with love. It's one of the best experiences. Because it's not just a kind of transactional deal. It's a real relationship. And so it's something personal. This was probably written at the time as well when of harvest time, which is why it's mentioned in verse 6. They're celebrating what God has done for them in his power and blessing in terms of the fruitfulness of the earth. They're saying, God blesses us. God blesses us. Please bless us more. But why? Well, I don't know if you noticed that there were two so that's in what is written. Two so that clauses. In verse 2, it's blessing us so that your ways may be known in the earth. And then there's another so that in the last section, which kind of mirrors the first one. And in our translation here this morning, it's written in. Yours may not have it, but it's implied. Verse 7, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. So two reasons are being given in this psalm. There's many others, of course, but two reasons given here for God's blessing. So that his ways may be known on earth, and so the ends of the earth will fear him. Because here's the thing. Many people just don't know about this God still, do they? They don't know about his ways. Nobody's ever told them. They've never seen it. They've never had a chance, in some cases, to get near a group of people who live it and who show it. They may not know any Christians or have a kind of a proximity to a church community who can show it and live it out in front of them, because that's what people need. And that's what this psalm is emphasizing, that the community of God's people are blessed so that they can bless those around them. People are being blessed as they come into contact with the community of God's people, both in his day and today. You see it emphasized throughout the whole Bible in different ways. It's very obvious, of course, in the New Testament. Jesus says, go into all the world, and tells them to proclaim the gospel everywhere, doesn't he? And he tells people to gather, he tells them to gather them, baptize them, disciple them. Basically that's church planting, isn't it? Jesus is basically saying, go and plant churches, because he's saying baptize people. That's the entrance into church belonging. And disciple them, teach them what this means over time, how they live it out, what it means to follow me. And do that all over the earth, so that people in every place can see something of what it means to know Jesus and follow him. That's what's so great about this church getting started, isn't it, in the last few years? That's why this is really important. That's why it's great when other churches are working together to see more churches started in our country and around the world, isn't it? That's why we're excited as Radstock to connect and help support church planting projects in many of the places that I've already mentioned. Because it's so that God's ways can be known on earth. And I don't know how you think about your church and your witness, but one of the key things to understand is the way that God places you as a Christian community in a wider local community as a beacon of light. That's what you're here for. So that people can see and hear what it looks like to follow God and to know Jesus. They see it and they hear it. This is a church. As a church, this is what you do. It's what it's for. So that the people of Milnthorpe and surrounding areas get to experience that. The church is blessed in lots of ways so that it can bless the people around. And hopefully that gives a real sense of purpose, doesn't it? That you're bringing blessing to this community, both in the things you do collectively and as you scatter as individuals through the week. I'll come back a little bit more to that later. So it's why being involved in church planting in where we are, but also around the world, is so important, because people need to know about God and his ways. And then the other so that, which really is an extension of the same idea, they need to fear him. I think sometimes we're not quite sure what to make about this idea of fearing God, are we? The Bible talks about the fear of the Lord quite a lot. And sometimes we will say, well, really it's about reverence and awe, which, it is true. That's certainly a real part of it. But there is a sense, isn't there, in which God should be feared in a right way. Think about the way that a child might rightly fear their parents. Not of course, there's a wrong and abusive form that can take, but there is a right sense in which a child reacts when you say, what will your parents say about that? And you kind of go, And you might think of it, you remember feeling that way yourself, especially, if somebody said they were going to talk to my mum. It would put the fear of God into me, as you might say. Maybe you can remember, you think about in schools. Part of the ability and to manage a class well often comes where there's a healthy fear of the teacher. Before I was a pastor, I taught in a school down in Luton for several years. I can remember the lady who was my mentor when I started, a legend that was Mrs. Herring. Okay, she's passed away sadly now, although she became a Christian towards the end of her life, which was another story. But we used to say she could fry a child with her eyes at 20 paces. And, and some of us tried to kind of learn that skill. The thick mascara helped, which I didn't kind of go for that look personally. But, she was a wonderful teacher. The kids loved her. She was very popular. They learned lots from her. But she was slightly unpredictable. And they knew they had to take her seriously. She meant what she said. Maybe we can remember the C.S. Lewis stories, the Narnia stories, where you've got the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And do you remember where the children first realize that Aslan is a lion? They're with the beavers, I think, aren't they? And they say something like, he's a lion? Is he safe? And Mr. Beaver goes, of course not. He's a lion. But he is good. And that's that sense in which he's trying to sort of reflect something of the wonderful King of the universe, God who loves us deeply, but who is, at the end of the day, the most powerful being. There should be something that's slightly scary and daunting about that, shouldn't there? He knows everything. He made everything. We should respect and honor and listen to him and listen to his son, as he said at the Transfiguration. And others need to know that and find actually the freedom, ironically, that comes from knowing that and fearing God. So as communities of God's people, we're blessed, not just for our own sake, not just so that we can have a nice time, but so that we can bless others around us, so that people can know and fear God. And just as this psalm is radiating and flowing out from the center, this is how God's blessing of the world works, isn't it? I think the psalm was effectively written this way on purpose, which makes it some pretty cool poetry, really, doesn't it? That even the actual way it's written demonstrates how the message works, that it goes out from the middle and spreads. That's why I think one commentator, Derek Kidner, calls this psalm the spreading circle. It's all about the spread of life-giving knowledge. Or another writer, C.H. Spurgeon, who was a pastor in London 140 years ago, was writing on this, and he says, "As showers which first fall on the hills, afterwards run down in streams into the valleys, so the blessing of the Most High comes upon the world through the church. We are blessed for the sake of others as well as ourselves. God deals in a way of mercy with his saints, and then they make that way known far and wide, and the Lord's name is made famous in the earth." That's what this psalm is all about. It's what we're trying to assist and help within Radstock too. It's what churches in every place are to be about churches being the means, the conduits of those streams of blessing going out and out into the world. But to wrap up, how are we to respond? The kind of so what factor. 3 things just briefly. Be thankful, play our part, and pray. Be thankful because, as I was thinking about this, when you get a sense of where we fit into this through time, we understand we're part of this being worked out, aren't we? Because, we in the UK are not the center of the universe. We're really not. We live on what, for these guys, would have been the far distant wild island of Albion, later known as Britannia. And, it was far, far away from where these things were first penned. I suspect few, if any of us, have any Jewish heritage. And so the fact that we are here, praising God and sharing his love, reading his word, we're part of the answer to this prayer. This would have been would have been hard to imagine for these guys. We're part of the fulfillment and the answer to this prayer. The knowledge of God, his love flowed out and out and out. So let's be thankful first. And then second, let's play our part. First of all, where we are, because the blessings we've experienced, as we've said, they're not so that we can just be a nice little club, but they are something that should spill out and overflow in blessing to those around us. And the idea of loving God and loving our brothers and sisters, and then beyond, loving our neighbor, and even Jesus said, loving your enemy. When you're blessed, it should bless others. Remember how Jesus said that the love that we have would be how people know that we're his followers, for one another, but also more widely. There's a pastor called Clint Clifton in one of the Radstock churches in the US, who put it really well in a talk I heard from him, where he said how when God blesses you and shows you something of his ways, your neighbors should benefit from that. It should be a knock-on. Or when you grasp a truth of what God wants of you and how he wants you to live, your kids should benefit. Your family, your wife, your friends, your husband, whoever it is, the people around you should benefit when God does something to you or blesses you in some way. When you know something new about the way that God works in the world, the person that you work by or spend time with through the week in just day-to-day life, there should be some effect of that they see. They may not even know what it is, but it should have an effect, shouldn't it, in the world around us as we live it out, as a community together here as you live it out, and as you have as well the courage to speak and say something about it. We live out our lives in communities, and the blessing of God comes to us. We live our lives, hopefully lives of joy and love and peace and all the fruit of the Spirit, and that flows out blessing others in the things that we do, caring, praying, speaking, loving, serving. And doing that where we are, but also for some of us, where we're not as well, somewhere else. Because some of us in all of this picture need to go, don't we? Some of us need to move. Maybe some of you have. Some of us need to move from one place to another, because for the circle to spread and this life-giving knowledge to keep on going out and out, some of us are going to need to move to keep that process happening. Others of us will be facilitating that with resources or finance. So whether we're goers or senders or facilitators or receivers or whatever, mobilizing to keep it going on and out is going to be necessary. We need to play our part. So we need to be thankful, play our part, both where we are and elsewhere, and then lastly, pray. Because remember, this psalm is not primarily some kind of thesis about mission. And it's not even just a piece of ancient literature, as we've talked about it, this wonderful piece of ancient poetry. Primarily, it's a prayer. That's what it is. And so, if you don't know what else to pray, pray this. You can learn it. It's not that long. Meditate on it. Print it out and stick it somewhere. And pray it every day. Put it to music if you know how to do that kind of thing. Funnily enough, I don't really know of any version of this musically, particularly. Maybe you do. You can tell me afterwards. But sing it if you could. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine on us, so that your ways may be known in all the earth, your salvation among all nations. May the peoples praise you. May all the peoples praise you. It's a wonderful prayer for God to act and honor his name around the world. And so as we kind of finish and pull it together, I wonder whether one of the things we could do now is read it together. All read it aloud together. It means you have to wake up, nudge the person next to you if they've fallen asleep. You've got to do something now. I want you to read it. And it's on the screen, or it was, there it is. Let's read it together aloud as a prayer and as a statement of faith, effectively, of what God is going to do in our world. And then we will sing our last song together. So, may God be gracious to us and bless us, and make his face shine on us, so that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth. May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you. The land yields its harvest. God, our God, blesses us. May God bless us still, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. Amen. Amen. Let's sing together our final song, Christ, our hope. We can stand and sing as the musicians start to play.
Your word gives life to